Hey guys, so this is week 13. So, I want to go over a few things here, talk about a little bit something different, something that's been going on for a long time, right? Ever since I lost my son. So, after I lost my son, of course, I started going back and questioning everything, right? That's just how my brain works. I have to know. I can't just let something sit there unfinished. I can't walk away from something that does not make any sense. My mind, the way it's wired, I need to understand, to trace things back, to look for reasons, to find the missing part, to see how things connect together, right? And after I lost Kody on February 18th, 2025, last year, that part of me went into complete overdrive, right? I was not just grieving, I was searching. I'm still searching. I was going back through everything connected to my son. Old texts from him, old messages from him, any moments that I could replay in my head of times that he came over, things that we done, talks that we had, right? Pictures. I was going back through every single ADT video because the camera would pick him up every time he came over, or the car, he was outside, or anybody was outside, right? So I went through any clips, right? Downloaded all of them, still have them, right? So I was looking, searching for any moments that I could find, right? I was studying pictures, right? I was looking at his eyes, his face, his expressions, right? I was where he was standing, what he was doing, what was around him, who was around him, where he was at, right? What he may have been thinking, like in his mind, like what did I miss, right? Like my brain was completely overdrive. It still is, but I mean that's what I was doing right after I lost my son because none of it made sense. And it still doesn't make sense, right? So I went all the way back, right? All the way back from pictures when he was little, from special occasions, from like ordinary days, pictures where he was smiling, pictures where I could see something in his eyes and wonder if I had seen it that way then, what I see now, right? And that's the thing about me. I have always documented everything, right? Right. And I've always documented life, right? Always kept some kind of a journal, some kind of timestamp for something. I have every single picture that I have ever taken organized in its own place, right? Album by year, album by special occasion by year, by seasons of life, right? How it's always been that way for me. Like my Google Photos is like literally set up from 1997 to 1998, all those pictures in there. And if something happened with in that year, like a field trip or a birthday party or Christmas or something, it was in its own category within that same year, right? That's just the way that I am. I have no idea. But so I have children pictures from before I had my kids, right? But once I started having my kids, I started organizing my pictures and putting their lives together in pictures. I started doing that from the time my oldest daughter was born in 1997. So I began doing that, right? Going through pictures and just like putting there, like when a year passed, okay, that was the pictures I went through my phones and everything that I had. Those pictures belonged in that year, right? And so year after year, I did the same thing. I still do the same thing from 1997 to 2026, right? Every year. I check my phone, I check whatever resources I have, I dump them in that specific album in my Google Photos. Um, so moment after moment, birthday parties after birthday parties, school holidays, right? Holidays, ordinary life things, little pieces of their life held together in pictures, right? Because I always said I may not remember everything the way that I need to remember it. So I need pictures, right? Um, and I need pictures, right? I gotta have pictures. So my kids always used to say, She got to take a picture for everything. And yeah, I do. Right. And I'm glad I did. Right. Because sometimes pictures is all that you're going to have left. Right. So after I had lost Cody, I went back through all my Google albums, right? All my pictures. I went back through like old computers that I have, searching to see if there's something on those computers that I may not have in my Google albums. And then, of course, me being me, make sure I download those, put those in the correct Google albums, right? Um, and I've got a lot of different old computers and stuff. So I've done that too, right? Trying to line everything up by date, put timestamps. Everything has to have a timestamp on there because dates are very important. And like I said, I'm still doing that. I'm still studying, analyzing, questioning, searching, right? May think I'm obsessed, but sorry, that's just me. That's just the way my brain works. Um, so trying to put the pieces together, right? Trying to understand why, trying to understand what happened, right? Trying to understand how, trying to understand if there is something that I missed, right? Because as a parent, you're like, when you lose your child and it's just like that, and there's no rhyme or reason behind it, right? And it's just instant. You start questioning everything, right? You start going, what happened? What did I miss? What did I overlook? Why this? Why this? Why? Like a billion thousand questions just like pop into your head. And you're constantly trying to figure out what happened, right? Trying to understand if there was something that God was showing me that I couldn't see yet. So everything in me was in overdrive, and it literally still is, right? I just don't express it outwards to people. I kind of keep it inside my own little bubble and stuff like that. And so in all of the searching, God began showing me things, right? And there's so much, just so much God has shown me since losing my son, right? From the very, very, like, not that day, right? Well, yeah, that day, because there's something God showed me why everything was happening. But God lets you look back at things and stuff. And the crazy thing is the very things I was searching so hard through, trying to figure out why, the what, the how, the whether I had missed something became the very places where God started handing me revelations, right? Little pieces, not all at once, not in a way that my heart could survive, but piece by piece, right? Every single day since I lost Cody, God has been giving me one piece at a time, right? Pieces to this massive puzzle, right? That I don't even know what the final puzzle is going to look like. Like, this puzzle is so gigantic, right? It's way beyond 1,000 pieces here. And I don't know how all things fit together. I don't know why some of the pieces hurt so bad, right? I don't know why some of the pieces just sit there and make no sense at all for a while. But God keeps handing them to me, right? One piece at a time. And in that, He keeps showing me that He is in the details. He's always been in the details. Even when I never knew who God actually was, back before I got saved 20 years ago, God was always in the details. Even when I didn't understand how He was moving, right? Even when things look random, even when things look disconnected, even when I couldn't see the frame, He was still there. Sometimes God brings something back to me. Sometimes He lets me make a connection. Sometimes He gives me a piece that I don't understand where it goes yet. Sometimes the pieces don't immediately connect to the other one laying beside it. Sometimes it just sits there, waiting. And then later, He hands me another piece. And then suddenly, I can see why the first piece matters so much. So I noted, of course I do. I document it always. I keep holding on to what God gives me. The things that He gives me matters. Sorry. Even when I don't understand them right away. Because some things, if you're searching with your natural eyes, and I've learned this, it's very important. If you're searching for things with your natural eyes, you will miss it, right? But when you look through your eyes with your heart, with God at the very center of it, He teaches you to understand how those pieces and connections are made. And it's so much more deeper than what looking at it with your eyes, so much more deeper. Things that make absolutely no sense to anybody else, right? God confirms to you exactly the way that you need it to be confirmed, right? And that brings me to my puzzle. The puzzle that had been sitting in my garage for over 15 years, right? Over 15 years, I had a puzzle sitting in my garage. That is this puzzle right here, right back here, that sits behind me on the wall, right? This puzzle right here. That puzzle has become one of the clearest pictures of what God has been showing me, right? It's a puzzle about family rules. You can see it back there. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle, and of course, I would never ever settle for anything less. It has to be something big, something complicated. That's just me. I can't just sit there with a puzzle that, oh yeah, this goes here. No, that's not me. I like puzzles to make them take work, right? I like odd puzzles, hard puzzles, puzzles that draw you in and make you keep searching for the next connection, right? This puzzle has been in my garage. It's literally sitting in a box for 15 years. Through all the moves and everything like that, I've never once thought about putting this puzzle together. I've bought new puzzles, I've did new puzzles, but never once have I touched that for over 15 years. Right? Very important. So after after all the puzzles, right? I like I said, I knew it was there, right? But just never pulled it out, right? And then something changed. So after Kody told me that he gave his heart back to Jesus on February 26, 2024, my son gave his heart back to Jesus and said, Mom, I can't do this alone. I can't do life alone anymore. I need God to come back into my heart, right? Something in me pulled that puzzle towards me, right? Something in my spirit pulled that puzzle. I didn't understand why, right? It wasn't right away, right after Kody told me that he gave his heart back to God. It was a couple months down the road, but I didn't understand at the time. I did not know what God was doing, right? I did not know that later this puzzle back here would mean what it means now. It was just something that just like led me to pull it out. So we started doing what I do with puzzles. And on June 21st, 2024, like I said, just a few months after my son told me, um, after that, I started sorting. So we officially started putting the puzzle together. And when I do puzzles, I have a system. Of course, I have a system. I don't just dump all the pieces out on the box and just start grabbing random pieces and things like that. That's not how my brain works. My brain works is I have to separate everything, right? I have to get all the edge pieces and put them in one part of the box. Then I go, and when I find a corner, I place the corner because there's only 4 corners on the table in a spot so I don't lose those. So I have my edge pieces and then I have my corner pieces. And then in the other box, I have where all the middle pieces go, right? In the other part of the box. So I look at every single piece and go through them until they're all gone through. And then I start the frame, right? because the frame always has to be done first, right? Because the frame, it like holds everything together on the outside. It gives you an idea of what you're working with. It shows you how big the puzzle is actually going to be, right? It gives you shape of things that you can't fully see yet. That's how I do puzzles, okay? The frame first, right? And then the rest. So I began putting the puzzle together on this like massive, right back here, this massive canvas board. Like this thing is like gigantic. And stuff. And I used that board so I could move it around, right? Wherever I needed to sit, because sometimes the lighting is not the right, to see what you need to look at. Sometimes you have to move the puzzle from room to room, from angle to angle, from one light to another light. You have to shift your position, staying in the same spot for too long. So you got to move before the pieces that are in front of you, right? To make them start making sense, right? That means something to me now, right? I didn't understand it then, but that means something to me now. I'll let you know later. At the time, it was just how I worked on puzzles, right? Now I look back and I see God, even in that, right? Even in June 2024, way before I even thought about anything, right? Right. And sometimes the piece is it's right there, right? But you can't see it from the angle that you're sitting in. Sometimes the connection is right there, but the lighting is not right yet. Sometimes you have to move. Sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes God has to bring you around to the other side before you can see what He has been showing you the whole time, right? And on June 22nd, the next day, after I get everything sorted, I start working on the frame, right? And I was having a little trouble with the border part, right? It's a black and white puzzle, so the edges are not like real easy to see, and the light beamed down on there. And I had the frame almost only done, but there was a section of the frame that I just couldn't get connected right. And then Kody came over, of course, as he always did. And I can still see him. I said, "Hey, Bubs." That's what I always call him. "Hey, Bubs," or Kody Bear. Help Mom out. Like, my eyes are not as good as they used to be. And he knows I used to crack up about, "Mom, put your glasses on." And wouldn't let me drive without them. But he knew my eyes are not as good as they used to be. And I said, "Hey, Kody, put that frame together for me, okay? Like, help Mom out and stuff." And so, like, I had most of it done, but just I was having trouble making that connection. Okay. So Kody came over to the puzzle and sat on the floor with me, because we were in the living room at the table down there, because it was sitting down low and I got to move all over the place. I can't sit still. So we started looking at the pieces, right? And thinking only the way that Kody could think. And he focused in, he studied them. And of course, before long, he had my frame completed for me, right? And then he said, "There you go, Mom." And then he laughed at me and told me that I was getting old. And that was funny. That was just Kody. He would pick at me all the time, but there was love behind it. It was just our thing. He's like, "Mom, you're getting old." And I'm like, "I know, but you know what? You are too. So that makes me even older." And so we laugh about it. And that puzzle became a daily thing, right? And when I work on puzzles, it's not something that I do like one day and then kind of like push it aside. That's just not me. Once I start on a puzzle, it becomes like an obsession, and I'm dedicated to it, right? I work on it every day, right? All my free time, I work on it. And then the pieces keep drawing me back, right? Until I can get the next one connected, right? Because I can't just go there and go, "Oh, you know what? I didn't do good." I have to connect something, right? There has to be at least a piece or two that I was able to find out of this whole big box of like black and white pieces in a box, right? I have to connect it. So I don't give up on puzzles because they're hard. I don't just stop because I can't see the full picture yet, right? I keep looking, right? I I keep turning the pieces. I keep trying. I keep moving things around, right? I keep going back to the pieces I thought that did not fit. And during that puzzle, Kody was there, right? And Kody always worked with me on puzzles, even when he was little and stuff. We had all kind of puzzles growing up and stuff. We had like these cool like 3D puzzles where there's like a cathedral, big cathedral, the shape of the earth and everything. I keep hitting that. But like a spear, like a spear puzzle and stuff. So it was like 3D puzzles and then like these massive big puzzles and stuff. So Cody always helped me with them. Um, and anyway, there was something about trying to find like the next piece, right? Trying to make the connection, trying to find and see where it belonged that kind of pulled him in too, right? It was kind of our thing. Many nights, Kody would come over and just help me with that puzzle. We would sit in the floor in the garage and spread out, put that big board, the canvas board back here, out on the ground, right? And I would grab a handful of pieces out of the box and drop them in the middle of the canvas board, right? And we'd start going through those pieces. And we would watch Monk or Bones or whichever one we wanted to watch that night because we watched them together. And so while the show was playing in the background, we did the puzzle. We'd talk about the show. We'd talk about what was happening. We would talk about life, little things, right? Ordinary things. The kind of conversations you know that are going to hold on to everything later, right? I mean, you don't know that these conversations right here, these conversations are going to be needed later. But anyway, I can still see how much we worked on that puzzle, right? Like we did it for months, right? Not that I wanted to rush through the puzzle. I did it for months. I let it take a little bit longer than what I normally let puzzles do because that puzzle kept my son coming back over and our time in the garage and working on something together. So I let that puzzle last a little bit longer. Usually I put puzzle together like in like a week or two and stuff, but that one was different. That one held something with my son. And I didn't know at the time, but I can still see us, right? Those late hours, like everyone else in bed and stuff, like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and me and my son in the garage working on this 1,000-piece puzzle in front of us. The TV was playing pieces on the all over the place there on the canvas and all that, and us just talking, looking, using like one piece at a time, connecting one piece at a time. And I'm like extremely particular with puzzles, right? Kody is too. We don't like to lose things, right? And so like I'm almost OCD with them. Well, okay, not almost, but fully. So yeah, I'm like fully OCD. Like, don't touch my puzzle. If you want to help me with my puzzle, you've got to make sure that you check your hands to make sure there's no pieces stuck to you. Stand up, make sure anything, if you have dropped one on you, make sure it falls to the floor. Don't take my pieces away from my puzzle and stuff. So it's like how kind of like OCD I am with, like, if you're touching my puzzle, you can't lose a piece, right? So I make sure I don't take out more pieces than what I'm working on, of course, and keep things separated. I keep control over my pieces, like I was saying. And I put my puzzles together for like years, right? And I have never, over my whole entire life, lost a piece of a puzzle, right? Never, ever. And if I ever worked on a puzzle that I got from like Goodwill or something like that, right? Because I like odd puzzles, different puzzles, puzzles that don't normally. Sometimes you can find good puzzles at Goodwill, but if I got the whole puzzle together, no matter how awesome it was or how hard it was, and found out that the puzzle I just bought at the Goodwill store had a missing piece in it, I would just tear it up and throw it in the trash and be like, well, okay, well, that was fun, but right, it was missing a piece. I couldn't keep a puzzle with a missing piece, right? That's just how I was, right? And a puzzle had to be complete. It had to be whole. It had to show the full picture, right? Had to make sense. I could not just look at a puzzle with one missing piece and say, I'll be okay with that, right? So keep that in mind, right? Because on October 8th, 2024, we finally got the whole puzzle together, right? So we started on June 21st and we finally finished it up on August 8th, right? So, like I said, I let it stay a little longer. Got the whole puzzle together. The whole puzzle except for one missing piece, right? I was literally like, I was going insane, right? I kept saying, no, this isn't right. This is not right, right? I could not understand it, right? I don't lose puzzle pieces. I looked everywhere. I searched everywhere for days, right? I even messaged my family and was like, hey, like, this is how distraught I was. I messaged my family. I messaged my daughter, right? I told Kody, I was just like, we got this whole puzzle together. Like, look how cool this puzzle together is, but it's missing a piece, right? I was just like flabbergasted. I was thinking I was so careful. I was so careful with every one of those pieces. I made people do like body checks to make sure if anybody ever came and helped me work on a puzzle, right? Like before I even moved it or touched it, I made sure everything. I did a room search and a floor search and a table search and a ground search, right? And there I was. Puzzle was done. And I was missing one piece, right? And like I said, I normally would have taken that puzzle and just torn it apart and threw it away. Normally. But something about that puzzle would not let me do that, right? Something about that puzzle was different. My son helped me with that puzzle. My son helped me with that puzzle. We had spent nights on that puzzle, months on that puzzle. We had conversations in that puzzle. We had laughter in that puzzle. We had time in this puzzle. We had months, like I said. It was not just some cardboard pieces anymore. It was part of me, part of Kody. It was connection. It was family, right? It was love. It was family rules right here, like it says on the back, family rules, right? And somehow, without me understanding any of that just yet, right? Because my son's still alive at the time, God had already building something into that, right? So I kept searching, as a crazy person would do that lost something. Anyway, I searched everywhere I could possibly think. I searched every room, and then, like, I even was like going to like, okay, like, you know what? I'm going to take this puzzle, and since it's dark, it's black, I can like take a black permanent marker and fill in the little missing spot because it was just like one puzzle piece there, and I could just like around it was like the mostly black, so I could take a black permanent marker and fill that missing piece in. Like, so that's where I was at, right? I was like, I can't tear the puzzle up for some reason, but let me just fill in this piece with a black marker and cover it up, and nobody will notice it, right? But God, that still small voice said, stop looking for that missing piece. Stop trying to fill it in, right? Stop trying to fill in and cover up that missing piece, is what he says. Stop trying to cover it up. And that settled inside of me, right? Sometimes we are all going to be just missing that one missing piece to complete something, right? And that one missing piece may never be found. And that hit loud even then, right? So I texted my family and told them that, right? I was like, you know what? Sometimes life's not always going to make sense, is what I told them back then in August 15th, I think it was. That life's not always going to make sense, right? Sometimes you're just going to have to accept and not try to cover things up or fill things in or replace it with something else if you're missing something, right? You just kind of have to be missing something, right? So I told him I was going to stop looking, right? But even after that, I didn't glue the puzzle like immediately, right? I didn't like glue it. I moved, kept it around for like a month or two, I think it was. It was in the garage, just laying on the board and stuff. So I would just shift it from like one space. I had it sitting on my computer desk over there, so the babies didn't get to it and stuff. And then when they were out in the garage, I'd move it up a little bit higher. And then when my husband wanted that work area, I'd move it back away so that he could do what he was doing. So I kept moving the puzzle back and forth in the garage for about a month or so. Still not gluing it together. By then, it was probably like I want to say maybe October, November, somewhere around then. But anyway, but one night, I'm not even sure why, right? Well, anyway, maybe not sure. But one of those nights when Kody came over, right? I decided, you know what? Hey, Kody. I told him, I said, hey, Kody. I said, this puzzle, I'm going to have to accept. God says I'm going to have to accept not being able to understand that missing piece. I'm going to have to not try to cover it up, right? And I said, God said sometimes that has to be okay, right? And then I asked him to help me glue it, right? So we get the glue, sit it down on the floor and everything. And so he gets down there with me. And I was like, here, help me glue this thing together because it's big. And so I handed him the glue and the paintbrush, and we sat on the floor watching Bones. I think it was Bones that night, coating layer by layer on the puzzle because it was quick drying glue until it sealed properly. And we worked on it together, right? Layer after layer, taking time and just letting it dry, watching the show, talking and everything. And then once it dried, we would grab, like, he would grab the corner on one side, I'd grab the corner on the other side, and we'd do a flip, right? We flipped it over to get on its back so that we could seal the back too, right? And then once that dried, he layered the back on it, and we flipped it over again and glued it to this canvas board back here, right? And then we hung it up. And this puzzle right here has got right up there one missing piece. If you see that little white spot up there on the top where it says and then hugs right there at the top, that's where the missing piece is. And then so we hung it up in the garage. And so that way he could always look at it because he was always in there. I could always look at it because I was always in there with him and working. And so both of us could remember that sometimes you can work so hard on something and still be missing one piece, right? At the time, back then, when my son was still here, I thought that was the lesson, right? I thought that was the lesson that I was getting from God, right? That sometimes you don't always find that one missing piece. Sometimes you have to accept the whole picture, and the picture may have an empty place, right? And sometimes you have to stop searching and let be what is, right? And let it be, right? But I didn't understand the depth of what God was showing me then, right? I didn't understand that later, after February 18th, 2025, when I lost Kody, this puzzle behind me, would become one of the loudest ways that God would speak to me, right? Because after I lost Kody, this puzzle became more than just a puzzle. It became a God in the details moment. It became something that God had lined up before I ever understood why. Things I did not understand when my son was here, alive, laughing with me, while he was still sitting there working on that puzzle with me, began to hit me even harder after he was gone. God had told me to stop looking for the missing piece. God had told me to accept the one piece that I could not find. And after I lost Kody, that hit me in a way I can't fully explain, right? Because now there is a missing piece in my life that I cannot find. There is a place in my life where my son belongs, right? There is an empty space that no one else can fill. And I can't just tear up the whole picture and throw it away. Even though every part in me wanted to throw the puzzle away, I can't just tear up my son's life and throw it away. Because there's too much love inside of it. There's too much life inside of him. There's too much God inside of it. There's too much Kody inside of it. This puzzle sits behind me now, and it has a life. It has a story built inside of it, piece by piece, by even a missing piece. It's not just something that's hanging back there to make the room look cool. It holds nights with my son. It holds conversations with Kody. It holds laughter with Kody. It holds him sitting beside me. It holds his hands helping me with the frame. It holds him telling me, hey, Mom, you're getting old, right? It holds the missing piece. It holds the moment that God told me to stop looking. It holds the moment that Kody helped me seal it. His hands were on it, pressing it with me, right? It holds something I didn't understand until later. And at one point, before we glue it, right, I think back about how I was trying to fill that piece with something just to cover it up so it wouldn't be noticeable, right? I was just trying to cover it up, right? And I wanted it to look complete. I wanted that empty place not to stand out. But every time God was like, he wouldn't let me. And even back then, before I understood why, he kept stopping me. No, don't cover it up. Don't fake it. Don't pretend that missing piece is not missing. Don't try to make it look whole when it's not. I now understand that missing piece in that 1,000-piece puzzle a lot differently now. Because I cannot cover up the missing piece in my life either. I cannot pretend Kody is not missing from my life. I cannot fill that space with marker. I cannot make it look whole for other people. I cannot smooth it over so it's easier for everyone to look at. There is a missing piece, and it's visible, and it hurts. But that does not mean that God is not still in the puzzle. It does not mean that God is not still in the frame. It does not mean that God is not still handing me pieces. That does not mean that God is not still revealing connections. That is exactly how God has been speaking to me. He is handing me one piece of a puzzle at a time. Some pieces, they don't connect right away. Some pieces sit beside other pieces that don't seem to belong together. Some pieces look too dark. Some pieces look too painful. Some pieces are just a place in the picture I don't need to look at just yet. But they're all important. So I document them. I save them. I look at the pieces God hands me from every single angle. I wait. I ask. I watch. And then I let God speak. And sometimes he lets me connect the pieces together. Sometimes he gives me a memory. Sometimes he brings back a date. Sometimes he lets me find things I wrote years ago. Sometimes he reminds me of something Kody said. Sometimes he takes me back to a picture or a video that I had not seen in that before, no matter how many times I've watched it. Sometimes things start clicking that have been sitting there all along. Just like, for example, one of the most recent things was actually just a couple of days ago on May 12th, right, 2026. I was on break looking through my YouTube on there, and this random video of this little lady popped up on my YouTube, like suggested watch, right? And it was about this lady. Sorry, it was about this lady. It was titled 10 Minutes in Heaven, right? Normally, like, I've never watched any of those kind of videos before, like about that. And so, but something drew me to that video, right? And it was a video about NDE. I had to look it up because I didn't know what that meant. So NDE is near death experiences, right? I'll post a link below in my comments so you can see the video that I'm talking about. But I was watching that video. I was actually reading through the transcript at first, because I was on break and it was like a 30-minute video. I knew I'd have time to like watch the whole thing, so I watched it later. But something in that video, the lady talked about her life, right? And she is a sweet little lady. She sounded real legit, right? She didn't sound like she was fake or some crazy person or something like that. And she had said that 29 months earlier that she lost her husband due to suicide, right? They had an argument and he went home and shot himself, right? And she talked about how messed up that made her feel, how much guilt she had, like just the downward spiral of all that, and how she felt like everything was like her fault and stuff. And then not long after, later on, she found out she was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, right? And then so she was completely wrecked, and she was praying to God, either heal me or let me go, right? Just heal me or let me go, God. And so one night she talks about how she began bleeding to death, right? Right before she started chemotherapy and everything, she just started bleeding to death, and she was like rushed to the hospital, and she was like literally dead for 10 minutes. And then she started talking about like what she experienced when she was dead for 10 minutes. And she started saying that, I'll let you watch all of it, but some of the things that got me was she started talking about she didn't know how she got where she was at, right? She just kind of just was there. It was like no zoot, no whoosh, whatever. It was like she was just there, right? One minute she said she was laying on the gurney, and then all of a sudden she was just like there in this utter black, the darkest of dark is what she said, space. But she wasn't scared, right? She just wasn't scared. She felt like beings and things around her and stuff, and she wasn't scared at all. And she said she still had like her thought, right? Her thought, like she said, she still remembered thinking and like what like her personality was, right? Why she was there. And she was talking about, I'm trying to get this right. So she was talking about how she was there, and she was like having this conversation with herself and about how she was thinking that when she knew she was dead, right? And she was thinking about how, okay, well, this is what I've heard. Like, I'm going to get this big life review of my life, and I'm going to be judged for everything. And I'm going to watch my whole entire life flash before my eyes. And somebody's going to stand there with a scroll and go like, "Who knows this? You did this, you did this." But she said when she got there, none of that happened. The only thing that she could really remember, she said, when she was there was not all the things that were wrong, right? But she remembered she still had thought about love, right? About all the people that loved her through her life, right? About all the happy things in her life. She said she remembered all the happy moments, right? She said she remembered all that. It was no review. She remembered all that. But she did say she looked back down and she was like, well, what am I missing? And she's like, that's what I'm missing. It's laying there on that gurney. I'm missing all the guilt, all the hurt, all the pain, all the shame, all the loss, all the things that made me feel like I was nothing. She's like, that's what I left behind, right? Because the only thing she could see is love. And then when I was thinking about that, I was just like, whoa, okay, that's cool, right? Because she was saying that she still remembered things, right? The good things. And that made me feel good, because I was thinking about my son going, "Because God, I love that boy." So I know he's definitely thinking about me. Like, if that's how it goes, then I know he's definitely thinking about me up there. And that gave me peace to know, or at least, right, visualize that when you go to heaven, you don't forget everybody on earth. You still remember the love, because I got so much love for that boy, right? So that gave me peace and stuff. And yeah, so that was one of the things I like. She explains it a lot better. But after that, she said she was brought into like another space, right? It was like the whitest of whitest of whitest of whites, right? She said she don't really remember how she got there, but then all of a sudden she was in this other space, right? And it was just so white. It's the whitest of whitest of whites. And she said she remembered that she had a form, right? A body, right? She's like, I know I have legs, but I didn't even think to look down. I have a head. I even turned my head and realized I had a shoulder, and I like turned my head and was like, whoa, what the world? Right. So she realized she still had a form, like a human form. And she goes through and talks about all that and everything. And then she talks about like others just like welcoming her, going, hey, welcome home. Right. Welcome home. And she was like, that was just so like, whoa, on there. But yeah, check out the video. I'm gonna post it down below. So check that out. It's really cool. She did write a book too. Um, so that's really awesome. I'll probably check that out as well. But that's just a little bit about the video. So I seen that, right, on May 12th, right? Like during like around like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, anyway, later on that night, I went to go stay at my parents' house and help my dad with my mom. And so it's about 1 a.m. in the morning. So it's May 13th now, technically. So it's about that time in the morning, and I get to working on my chapters in my book, right? And the chapter that I'm actually on is the letter that I had written to my son, right? And so the letter that I had wrote for my son, I didn't notice, right? Like, so this is the letter I wrote to my son. It's actually in his ashes back here. So it's a letter that I actually wrote to him back when he was 3 years old, in February 2025, right? And for some reason, sorry, not 2025, in 2005, correct that. So in February 2005, 20 years ago, I wrote a letter to my son, Kody Bear, when he was 3 years old, saying that for him and his sister, that if mommy was to ever go first, right, don't be mad at God. That's one of the things I wrote. Don't be mad at God. God must have had some special reason for bringing me home. And that I promised him that I would, Pinky promised, that if mommy was in heaven, that I would always watch over them. And that I'll always blip kisses from heaven and tell him I love him to the moon, trees, and the stars. Right? And now all the way in heaven. And Pinky promised to blow him kisses every night. Right? So that was the letter. Just a short version of it that I had written back when my son was 3, exactly 20 years ago in February, same month I lost my son. So I thought it was fitting to read that letter at his service. I thought that's what the letter was for, right? And so that's what I did. I read it at his service. And those details will be in my book too, just more expanded in there about the backstory. And then I noticed something last night, right, when I was working on that chapter. I noticed that it didn't have the exact date that I wrote that letter in the book, right? So I was trying to make it right. So I went back and noticed that it was only dated February of 2005, 20 years before I lost my son. right? And when Kody was 3 years old. So I went looking for the date, right? I pulled up my Google pictures, of course, and went to where I had took a picture of that letter, because I took a picture of that letter on February 8th of 2025, exactly 10 days before I lost my son. That's important too, right? So that's when I took that picture. Before anything ever happened to my son, I took that picture of that letter in a filing cabinet that I had randomly be going through. That's in the book too. That I was randomly just going through. And God's like, take a picture of that letter, right? You're going to need it. Didn't know why. Just did what I just told, took the picture. Didn't even think about it since. So anyway, when I found the letter, the date on that letter said February 22nd, 2005. February 22nd, 2005. So then I went and looked in Kody's journal, because after he went to heaven, I started a daily journal for him. Like I said, I noted everything. So I started a daily journal, dropped pictures in the journal and everything like that. And then, so I go back to that date, February 22nd, 2025, right? Just a few days after I lost my son on February 18th, 2025, and looked at what I had put in that journal. And all of a sudden, I realized something I have never, ever noticed before, right? It was exactly, not a day off, but exactly 20 years later, on February 22nd, 2025, my journal told me that that is the same day I had to walk into the funeral home and see my son laying there on that table. The exact date that I gave him his last pinky promise was the exact date 20 years earlier that I wrote that letter for my son when he was 3 years old. That is not something I went searching for, right? Like, that's not something I could not have made happen. That is not something I noticed back when I was searching for pictures, right? Back when I thought it was for this. That's not something I noticed until God let me see it just a few days ago, right? And when I saw it, I felt like another piece had been handed to me. Not a piece to make everything okay. Not a piece that took any of the pain away. Nothing's going to take the pain away, but a piece, a detail, a connection, right? So I just sat there last night, just looking at the pictures of him that I took that day, our pinky promise, right? Looking at the pinky promise, the one I keep like on my phone here of our pinky promise from that day when I gave my son the physical last touch of a pinky promise that I could, right? And the whole time, like I said, I thought it was only meant to find that letter, to read that letter at his service in the event that I was the one who was going to die, right? To tell my kids not to be mad at God. Promise them to blow them kisses from heaven. I would be the one to do that. And at the time when I found that letter, again on February 8th, 2025, before I lost my son, right? And then when I found it again after I lost my son and realized that I took that picture, I thought God was only showing me that that letter was for the service and not to be mad at him. He was giving me my words back towards my son. But just on May 13th, 2026, God showed me that piece at a different angle. He showed me the puzzle in a different light, right? The puzzle. in a different light. That was the same day that I ever gave my son his pinky promise. I was just sitting there, just like dumbfounded, like just staring at, because I took a picture of it, like what was on my screen, my chapter in my book, the journal, in the pinky promise, in the letter. And I was just sitting there going, oh dear God. It was literally like a year and a half later. And sitting there the whole time in front of me. And God finally put those pieces together for me in a way that I could see them. Then later, after work and I went through the day, I started working on my book again, right? So I was still in the same chapter because like I didn't finish it because I was just like, whoa, just like overwhelmed, right? Overwhelmed with like, oh my God, aha, kind of moments and stuff. And so then I started working on my book again. And as I was working on my book, I realized something else, right? I'm still in that chapter about the letter, about 2/22/25. I was like, I remember that because I was at the part where I was writing in the chapter in there about waiting in the car, and then I grabbed my 20-year chip, right? Because back in April 16th, 2024, me and my son, the first time I ever went to CR, Celebrate Recovery Group. So it was the first time ever. Like, I'd never been to Celebrate Recovery before. God had a way of changing me and stuff, but that's in the book too. But anyway, so it was the first time I went with my son, right? So just to show him, right? When they called the chips and everything like that, I went up there, the new very first time I were going, and I got my 20-year chip. 20-year chip. All right. On April 16th, 2024. Right. My son got his first year chip. Right. And so when we went to see him at the funeral home, I grabbed it out of the steering wheel and I wanted to make sure that he had something to hold in his hand. Right. And so I left it with him that day because I gave it to him. When after we had gotten them and I gave them to them because for CR chips, you're supposed to give them away, right? So I gave it to my son. And just as proof, right? I'm proof that God can do something in your life. Like, don't give up, baby, don't give up. God can do something. And it was exactly like my 20-year chip, right? And I was sitting here like the other night, like on the 13th, still the same day. And I had like had this like moment, like this connection again with these pieces. Like the pieces started coming together a little bit more. And it was then that I had realized that I had wrote the letter exactly 20 years ago. I went and got my first chip with my son in 2024. My 20-year chip, right? Showing my son that God was proof, right? And like, I didn't realize that until like literally 11:39 p.m. on May 13th, right? I didn't put that connection together, right? But I just thought that was just like, what? Huh? 20-year letter, 20-year chip. I gave it to my son. This is the first time I ever went and got a chip. My son holds his chip. I lost my son 20 years later. These dates are all matching up. Like, what the heck? God is in the detail, right? And then something else, like I'm looking through there because I'm looking through my Google pictures, of course, and trying to like, I was going to get a picture of my 20-year chip, and I was going through to see like exactly what the date was. And as I'm scrolling through my Google pictures, of course, I have pictures. I got a picture of Kody and the last chip that he held in his hand. Last chip he's got was his 10-month chip. 10-month chip. So it's a picture of a palm of his hand and his 10-month chip because we always took pictures of them and stuff. And I sat there and looked at that picture for a second. I was like, wait a minute, 10 months? Okay, 10 months. Okay, I'm like losing my mind right now. I'm like, not really. But I'm like sitting there going, okay, 20 years. Okay. All right. 10 months was the last chip my son got. I found that letter that I wrote 20 years ago exactly 10 days before I got my son, right? Numbers are matching up here. And I'm just like, what the world, right? So now I've got the chip, the 20-year chip, the 20 years I wrote the letter, exactly 20 years I lost my son, the 20 years on the exact date I wrote that letter was the date that I went to see my son in the funeral home. And now I am looking at this chip that was the very last chip my son ever got for 10 months. And I found this letter exactly 10 days before I lost my son. I'm like, oh my God, like I am losing my crap right now. Like, okay. And I am just seeing this a year and a half later. Like none of this was like making sense. There, I was just doing what I was doing like I normally do, right? And then something inside me said to go look at the date too. What date did Kody get that chip, right? And of course, I did. And so I clicked over with the Google Photos, and if you push on the little dot thingies, it'll tell you like the information of the timestamp that the picture was taken. So I looked, right? So here I am at like 11:44 at night, and I looked on the date that Kody got that chip, February 3rd. And I'm sitting here going, huh? February 3rd. Okay, so now, February 3rd, Kody was exactly 3 years old when I wrote that letter, right? 3 years old. So I'm flipping out here. So now on top of the 20-year connection, and I just recently just discovered the 10-day, 10-month connection. Now the spirit inside me told me to look at the date it was taken, and it was taken on the 3rd of February. My son was exactly 3 years old when I wrote that letter, right? And I was just like, mind blown, right? I was just like mind blown and stuff. And like a moment where God lets you see where He has been in the details long before you would need those details and things like that. Like that's some of the things I've got in my book. And things like that just keep happening. Like I said, even now, today, just the other day, like God just keeps showing me pieces by piece by piece by piece, right? And I'm like not crazy because I have like timestamps, like I have pictures, I've got like documentation, like I've got like journal entries and stuff. Like I'm not losing my mind and stuff. But God is just giving me the pieces, like piece by piece, in only a way that I can understand. And He brings them back. He makes connections. He lets me see things I could not see before. And He hands me something that may not make sense to anybody else. I can tell somebody else the same story and they'd be like, whatever, right? But as to me, it lands in my heart in a way that He knows that I need, right? And I keep thinking about the puzzle, how I sorted pieces, how I start with the frame, how Kody helped me finish the border, how we sat together, right, late at night in the garage, how I searched for everywhere for the missing piece, and how God told me to stop looking, how I wanted to cover the empty spaces, how God would not let me, how Kody helped me glue it exactly how it was, and how as it hangs in the garage, right? Visible piece missing. Now it hangs back here behind my head with the pieces blasted missing on there. And now how after losing Kody, God is still using pieces to speak to me because I am now living inside of a puzzle I didn't ask for, a puzzle I don't know how to finish, a puzzle I never would have chosen, a puzzle with a missing piece that can never be replaced, right? God's still there. He's still there in the details. He's still there in the pieces. He's still there in the frame. He's still there in the connections that I don't understand. He's still there showing me that the pieces are not finished just because I cannot see, right? He's showing me that some pieces have to wait, maybe a year and a half later, right? He's showing me that some things only make sense later. He's still showing me that he was working before I even knew what he was doing. And I still don't know what the final picture is going to look like, or if I'm going to see the final picture this side of heaven, right? I still don't know how to make all these pieces fit. I still don't know why some of the pieces hurt so much. I still don't know why I have to live with this missing piece on this side of heaven. But I know God keeps giving me what I can hold, one piece at a time, then another, and then another. And I keep writing them down. I keep putting them in a journal. I keep holding on to them because I believe God is showing me something, not all at once, not in a way that will crush me, but piece by piece, the way my heart can survive it. Maybe that's what I'm learning. Maybe God does not want to hand us the whole picture at once. Maybe because sometimes he gives us piece by piece at a time, because piece by piece is maybe all we're able to carry. Maybe sometimes the missing piece stays visible because we're not supposed to pretend it's not missing. Maybe sometimes the frame matters before the picture makes sense. Maybe sometimes we have to move the whole board into a different light so we can see the connection. Maybe sometimes the pieces that we cannot find become the very thing that God uses to speak to us later. And maybe sometimes, long before we know it's coming, God is already building something in the details. That's what I keep seeing. That's why I keep documenting. That's why I keep holding on to. Because God has been in the details the whole time. That's why things that I do on my YouTube channel matter, right? That's why my book for my son matters, because he is more than the headlines in an obituary. He is worth a book, so much more. So if any of this, guys, spoke to you, helped you in any way, or you just want to comment or whatever, like, comment, subscribe down below, share. It gets the word out. Definitely check out that video because it did give me some kind of peace. The one I posted down below, it did give me some kind of peace when I was watching that. But anyway, as for Kody, same bad time, same bad channel. Coach Squirrel. I'll have you to the moon, trees, and the stars, pups, and all the way to heaven. My babes. Night, guys.